Hey everybody, it's Dr. Eric Balcavage. We're back for another edition of Thyroid Answers Podcast. And I have another guest today. Her name is Sophie Shepherd. She's the founder of She Talk Health and the creator of the She Talks Health podcast. She's a functional diagnostic nutrition practitioner and an NLP certified life coach. Some of you may be going, I don't even know what those things are, but we're going to find out pretty shortly what they are and what all this has to do with thyroid physiology. So, Sophie, welcome to the Thyroid Answers Podcast. How are you today?
I'm good. Good to see you again, twice in 1 week.
Twice in 1 week, because I was interviewed a couple days ago for your podcast, and we had a great conversation. We essentially ran out of time because we were talking so much. But maybe the place to start is to find out a little bit more about you. Like, what do you do, and how did you get into this whole functional medicine space? And I know we kind of have a common bond in trying to help people with thyroid issues. I think recover. We'll talk about that, recover versus manage. But how did you get into this whole space to begin with?
Yeah, I got into this through my own health journey. I was 16 when all my health stuff started. I had really, really bad anxiety, and I was diagnosed with IBS, which I always just say, if you remove the I, you have BS. So it was a kind of a
Mhm.
BS diagnosis, but I
I
had
like that.
you can you can quote me on that one. I'm thinking about it for the last 15 years. So I was just really struggling. I was the girl in high school who was running to the bathroom 5 times a day during school. I didn't realize that there was something else out there for me because the doctor just gave me Prilosec, which we could
Mhm.
talk about lowering stomach acid maybe too today, for 7 years. And I just had gut issues and a crazy rolling anxiety. So I was put on birth control for my hormones. I was put on antacids for my gut issues, and I was, put on all these meds to kind of suppress the anti-anxiety medications, all these things, but I still didn't feel better. So when I was 22, I ended up in a relationship with a man who was very narcissistic and emotionally abusive, would call me names, would yell at me, all these different things. And honestly, it was my first like real relationship out of college as a quote unquote adult. And I didn't know what to do with it. I was just stressed all the time. I was, traumatized. And that's when I started noticing like the traditional thyroid stuff. My hair was falling out. I was like pulling at the bottom of the sink. I had all the gut issues still. I was so tired. I couldn't even pick up my handbag. That's how tired I felt. That cellular fatigue where you just can't even do anything. And that's when I started getting really like depressed, like suicidally depressed. It was really, really bad. And I went to the doctor. I was sharing this with you on my podcast, and I say I got lucky because my TSH was actually elevated enough for her to say, you have hypothyroidism. Here's levothyroxine. She told me I was just depressed. She told me just to take my meds, that there was like nothing more she could do with me 6 months later when I came back and felt terrible again. So I actually just fired her at that point, because I was like, okay, I got my meds from you, but I need something else. And I started to look around for someone. And this was 12 years ago. So it was way before anyone really knew functional medicine that well. I mean, we didn't even have gluten-free options besides Udi's. So it was pretty rough. But I found a chiropractor that was a functional medicine provider. And he was so kind. And he explained the connection between my gut and Hashimoto's and what I needed to do to heal. And I did. I followed everything he did. I told me to do. I changed my diet. I took myself off birth control. I did so many things. I got out of that abusive relationship, finally had the strength to say no to him and get out of there. And I started to heal my mind, my body, and my spirit. And then years later, I found out that all these other women had the same diagnosis and that I was not alone. And I started to get really into the idea of sharing it. I have a really, maybe I can share later, I have a really good story about the actual day that I started my career. But that was really the backstory to it, was seeing what healing was possible. And I think one thing that really I really didn't love was that there wasn't a lot of support because he was still in a position as a doctor where he couldn't really coach me through the process. So one thing that I really like to do is coach people through the process of, restoring their thyroid health, because it can be a pretty lonely process. So that's my story. That's how I got into, doing this and even learning what this was. I didn't even know what a health coach was, or functional medicine, or labs, or nutrition, none of it. I've learned all of it over the last 12 years.
All right. So you've got your own thyroid issues, you get some help from a functional medicine practitioner, you're able to recover. You then say, hey, there's a whole bunch of other people having these same issues. And then you went off to some training, right? Is that what the training as a functional diagnostic nutrition practitioner allowed you to do, is be the person that really helps kind of coach people through the process?
Yeah, so fun story. I was working in New York City as a corporate event planner. I used to work in theater and then I did corporate events whole other life.
Mhm.
And I was at this event, and my responsibility was actually to take care of the speaker, like make sure the speaker had their slides, their coffee, their water, whatever. The speaker that night was a key lobbyist for Monsanto. And he was talking about how their product's awesome. There was boxes of Roundup Ready in the middle of the table. I mean, the boxes and boxes of herbicides everywhere. And I just couldn't handle it because I had just healed. I just felt like I had gone through this whole process. So actually that night, I decided to do my first training, which was at the Institute for Integrative Health, which is more of a health coaching, generalized health coaching program. And then a few years later, I was realizing that I really wanted to add the labs in and be able to support people with that, because that's really a huge piece of what helped me. So then I did the FDN, and that allowed me to interpret labs. I'm not a physician, so I don't diagnose anyone with Hashimoto's or anything else, but we do coach up function, and we can see a lot of the same things that are going on with the gut, with the immune system, with mold, with metals, with minerals, through going through that training, and then just several extensive years of more training after that, because I'm kind of a nerd and I just love to learn.
So now you get into this space and you're learning a whole bunch more. But I really want to kind of cycle back to, like, when you and the functional medicine practitioner had that conversation early, and and he was kind of telling you that, hey, there's a tie here to what's going on with your gut that relates to your thyroid physiology. What was your understanding then about what was going on with your health, your gut, and your life, and how it might have led to hypothyroidism? And has that thought process changed over time that now you're in this space helping other people?
It's definitely changed. But at the time, I'm being completely, ignorant to all things health. What he explained was kind of the traditional intestinal permeability, leaky gut conversation, the molecular mimicry, about how, certain substances, certain toxins, parasites, bacteria, things like that could create a lot of inflammation in the body. And so whatever was going on in my gut, whether it was parasites, bacteria, fungus, could be creating some inflammation in my body that could be causing the antibodies to act up. He was also the person who actually ran the blood work to tell me that I even had antibodies. So the original provider, as we talked about on my podcast, a lot of times they don't even run the antibodies just for various reasons. So that was also a new kind of diagnosis or label, was the Hashimoto's from that. And so he was just sharing that if I could get the inflammation down, if I could heal my leaky gut, if I could remove the infections, and I could eat right, that I would see massive change. And I did, at the time I really did. I mean, it was like, I was eating a pretty standard American diet. I didn't even know what a supplement or a nutraceutical was. So for me, doing that process restored my hair. It restored my energy. I dropped like 35 pounds. I was like pretty, not completely overweight, but I was definitely heavier than I am now. Yeah, it just kind of, at the time, it really did fix everything, like kind of restore
Mhm.
things. I think to our conversation on my podcast last week, something that's evolved from there is just thinking more holistically about the stressors that were going on in my life at the time. Because I also had 9 mercury fillings. So heavy, the heavy metals and silver fillings. I had the abuse and the emotional stress going on as well. And I had all of the gut issues beforehand, right? So there were multiple layers, and there's probably even more. I've thought about this so many times, but those are kind of the 3 that I think about the most. And I think we were talking about like flares and when flares come up and stuff. I think when stress arises for me, emotional stress arises for me, and if it's something I can't like put away or handle right away, that can create some more, inflammation or create some wacky feelings and sensations coming back. So that's shifted for me. I didn't realize how much I don't think I realized how much getting out of that relationship also really contributed to helping me heal at the time.
So we talked about this a little bit. Like when we think about the situation at that point, like early on in your journey, and you may still feel this way. So I don't want to put words in your mouth, and I want you to explain it because we may have different perceptions as to what's going on. But somebody might look at you developing hypothyroidism and say, oh, all of this stuff that's going on is because you have hypothyroidism. Okay. Versus where I would sit is that, of course, you developed hypothyroidism. You had all of these stressors going on that activated a chronic immune inflammatory response, down-regulated conversion, triggered thyroiditis. I know we talk about the molecular mimicry. I think that happens for some people, but I really believe in my heart and through doing this for 30 years that the immune system often isn't doing the wrong thing. The immune system is doing the appropriate thing given the triggers. So we at that time, and maybe the person you were working with at that time did explain it that way, like, hey, all of what's going on here is driving the hypothyroidism, and if we fix that, then hypothyroidism gets better and conversion gets better. Or was it, hey, your immune system has become dysregulated because of these things and it's attacking it as a side effect? Do you understand where I'm going with that?
I do. It's an interesting nuance, but an important one. I definitely feel now the way that you feel. Like we were talking about this kind of, board that was just like gonna break under the pressure. Like I think about it now and I go, oh my gosh, of course, of course that's what my body naturally did. And I personally view the body as like very intelligent and it's always working for us. We might not like the output. We might not like that we feel sluggish and our hair is falling out and we have the hypothyroidism and all those things. But of course, it's going to react in response to what it's being given. But yes, at the time, it was definitely more of the original theory of, of all the molecular mimicry and all of that stuff.
And for the listener, I think it's really important to understand like that the nuance of what we're talking, because if we believe that we've dysregulated the immune system and the immune system is out of control, then yeah, it makes sense that we have this belief that our immune system is attacking us, right? And we can understand why maybe a medical physician would say there's nothing you can do because your immune system is attacking your thyroid gland. They don't run antibodies because they already know it's probably an immune-driven response. So that's why they typically don't run antibodies. Like it doesn't matter, and it doesn't relate to what they're treating. They already know it's thyroiditis. They already know whether it's antibodies, not antibodies, and we can get into that conversation too, but they don't care. Not that they don't care, the assumption is it's thyroiditis because nobody lives in a world where they think it's an iodine deficiency at this state in allopathic medicine primarily. They're not even looking at it. They don't test it. They don't try and treat with it. So the general consensus is it's thyroiditis. So your immune system is out of control. It's damaging your tissue. There's nothing you're going to do about it. It's an autoimmune condition, which I hate the term, and you're screwed. So we're just going to give you what the gland would have made, the T4, and everything should be good, right? But if you're in a camp where you're saying, man, my body isn't attacking me, it's trying to protect me from something, that's a game changer. Because now you're like, okay, I don't need to work against my immune system. I have to work with my immune system to figure out what's creating the stress and the overload and the danger cues and the danger signals. And now we have an option to heal and recover, which is exactly what that functional medicine practitioner did for you in the beginning, whether they were expressing it that way. In the back of their mind, they're saying, hey, if you deal with your gut, if you deal with this, if you deal with that, you can recover. And the reason you can recover is because the danger cues are away and the immune system goes, okay, we don't have to keep creating this response. Does that make sense?
It's such a good nuance because it really, to me, ultimately is, are we thinking we're living in a body that's against us or for us? And so many people that come in, I'm sure to see you as well, are thinking like, I don't have a relationship with my body. My body's betrayed me. My body is not. I've heard this story in various ways, and I've thought this about myself so many times. I had to rewire my whole thought process about this. Like, it is so key, because if we think that we're in a war with our own body, we can just
Mhm.
see how fast that's going to go, right? Because or how hard that's going to be for us, right? We're going to continue to butt up against our own cells. And I believe our cells are listening to what we're thinking and how we're behaving. So if we want things to kind of calm down, I think knowing that and understanding we're on the same team with our body is actually really, really key for healing
Yeah.
and
It's so
restoration.
it's so empowering, right? Because if you're thinking from a perspective like my immune system is attacking my tissue and there's nothing I can do, that's like a really defeated situation, right? Same with
Right.
I have depression, right? Oh, then I have a disease where I'm always sad. No, that's part of the same whole process, right? When there is threat and when there's danger, there's going to be a change in neurotransmitter physiology that may lead to some anxiousness, may lead to some depression. But that's, again, maybe not broken physiology, but part of that adaptive response.
It's the same, it's the same conversation, and there's no question in my mind as to why I was, prescribed Lexapro for 10 years, right? It's like, oh, you have this uncomfortable symptom, you have anxiety or you have depression. Here's a pill that will suppress those emotions for you. And I want to be really clear for anyone listening, I have a zero judgment. I was on this stuff for 10 years. It's just an interesting conversation of I didn't know at the time that there might be other options. Like, oh, actually, well, if I kind of decrease my stress load, if I have tools to manage my stress, if I have tools to rewire my brain and think differently about this depression, because I used to think like, oh, all of these difficult emotions are bad emotions. But what I realize is that they are just difficult and they are just emotions, and they are here. They are also here for us, right? Guilt, shame, fear. We don't want to live in them, obviously, but they are here for us. And so when you can start to understand that, you can have a little bit more compassion for yourself, and you can start to shift things, and then you're not against yourself. Again, these are just emotions that are coming from us, right? So if we're labeling those as bad, then we're labeling ourselves as bad.
We can get really deep in here really quick, but I think one of the foundational things that we need to consider is that our body is not typically trying to attack ourselves, but as you said, it may not allow us to feel the way we want to feel. But if we're open to it and we go, okay, I'm having pain, what might be causing that pain, that depression, that irritability, that anxiety, right? Then we can potentially solve the issue. It doesn't feel good, but and we can manage those feelings or those symptoms with a management strategy, but that doesn't fix it, right? It's like,
Right.
and we have to everybody gets to determine what they want. You're married, right?
I am.
Sometimes you want the honest answer, even though it doesn't feel good, and sometimes you just want the management. Like, how does this look on me, right? Your husband could, may go, okay, what does she really want here, right? Like, it doesn't look good on you, right? And you could get mad, but he's being honest, right? Or he
Yes.
could be like, it looks fantastic, right? And when he really doesn't believe it, and you might like that answer, but then later realize, yeah, I did not look good at that, right? And so
Yes, totally.
I don't know if this is a good analogy, but for our physiology, it's the same thing. I only want to feel good. Okay, well, that's a management strategy many times, and there's things you can do to manage those signs, those symptoms. And if that's your goal, that's fine. There's no judgment there. But for me in my world, in my life, and I think for you in your life, and what you're trying to do for your clients, I'm trying to help them with recovery, whatever that means, right? For them. Like, does that mean that my thyroid gland works and I don't need thyroid medication? Yeah, that may be what recovery means. Or recovery could mean I need some thyroid medication because my gland's been atrophied and damaged for so long, but the medication I take actually work at the cell and tissue level to allow me to feel and function great. To me, that's still recovery versus management. Management to me is, I'm going to give you this to maintain a certain lab value within a certain range, or to try and manipulate symptoms. And you're always having to tweak with management strategies, versus recovery is a much better place to be if that's what somebody's goal is.
I love that distinction, especially for anyone listening who might be like, oh my gosh, that means I can't take medication. I mean, we're not saying that at all. And there's certain times for certain things. I mentioned this year has been extremely stressful for me. And so I went back on medication, and actually it's helping me feel really great. And I'm also still doing all the other things I know to do to take care of myself, right? So it is about finding what you desire and what you want, and understanding that difference between manage and recover. I think that's I love that. I've never heard someone talk about it like that, but I really do love that.
And when it comes to recovery, we talked about this a little bit on your podcast, and we were talking about a little bit more about your story. But patients oftentimes, whether we're working on their thyroid physiology, or working on their gut, or they're working with somebody on their sex hormones, and they get to a point of recovery and they're doing well, and then all of a sudden a lot of stress comes back in their life. The same patterns start to come back. My gut's a mess, my hormones are dysregulated, my thyroid is not working, my thyroid physiology is not working as well as it should. Maybe my blood pressure's up, my blood pressure's down, I have anxiety, I have some insomnia. And they think that all the work that they didn't work, because they're back to where they are, right?
Oh yeah, this is a good topic.
And so you and I had this conversation, and we said, but should we be surprised that if this stress load becomes excessive again, that we wouldn't have the same patterns come back again, right? Shouldn't we expect that to be that? So do you want to talk about that a little bit from your perspective?
Yeah, it's something that I've never talked to another practitioner about, but it's something that I've noticed, even just maybe this is like, I don't know if this is funny or just something that's interesting in my relationship. Is so for me, because like I mentioned, my stuff was mostly gut, and for me it was mostly, like, if we want to call it IBS-D, so it was looser bowels. So whenever I'm having some sort of stress reaction, that's usually what happens for me. It's like I'm in the bathroom. Sorry to be so explicit on the podcast, but that's my pathway, I think. And anxiety is another one. My husband is like the sinus, he gets like all sinusy. He's like on the couch. He's out, he's so sick and he's like just down. And I'm like, I get the sniffles for 3 days. And I go, oh, I have a cold. And he goes, I don't even want to hear about your cold because it's not a cold, and so it goes that way. And so I think of it the same way for us here. And for anyone who's listening, I've seen this so many times where people are so hard on themselves. Like, oh my gosh, I messed it up. Something I did, it's, blah, blah, blah. And we have all these stories and blame. And it really gets us nowhere. And I've been there. I've been there so many times. I've been there where I'm sitting on the couch and I'm like, oh my gosh, my body is doing that thing again. I'm so annoyed with my body. But you got to catch yourself there, because it's just trying to protect you, right? And it's just doing what it knows how to do best. So this year, I found out I was exposed to some molds of water damage in a prior building. My mom had cancer. This year, there's just been a lot. It's just been a lot of things. Many, many things. And of course, my pathways just opened back up, and that's what was going on. And what was interesting for me was I've been stable, I would call it stable or recovered, like we were talking about, for maybe, I would say like 11 years prior to this. Mm-hmm. So it actually took me a second to recognize, oh, hey, remember when your body talks to you with these symptoms, that there's something going on that you can address and when you're ready. And so it's actually only been in the last month or so that I've gotten the testing, gotten the answers, started to work back on my nervous system, started to reset the adrenal exhaustion from my mom and all this different stuff. and I'm feeling a lot better. My body's responding, right? Because I'm removing some of those stressors. So
Mhm.
just be gentle with yourself too when these things pop up. It could take a little bit of time. I know it did for me. But once you catch it, you already have, if you've already gone through this process with someone, you have the tools. You already know how you can support yourself most of the time. So that's my biggest thing, is like listen to your own body in those times, because if you've been through this before, you probably already know what to do.
Yeah, and I think I want to reiterate what you said. It's like it's not like your fault that a pattern comes back, right? We have default, our bodies have these default patterns. Like we have a limbic system that's defaulted to protect us, right? We learn a language early and we're stressed. We kind of, even if we're speaking another language, we'll go default back to that early language, right? We have
Yes.
patterning from our mothers, our fathers, our teachers, our preachers, like as we grew up. And some of those were good and some of them were bad. But then as we can override them, we go, oh, that was silly. I won't do that. That was not a good idea. But under heavy levels of stress, we often default back to certain patterns. And I think just like you were talking about with your spouse, like how his body typically responds to that excessive stress load is probably going to be different than how your body responds to it. And in my world, like when somebody comes in and says, hey, what's wrong? I got all of these different things wrong with me. I'm like, no, you don't. You have a multi-system adaptive disorder going on. You have excessive load of stress. Your body is shifting your physiology. You're down regulating some of the really important systems to you feeling and functioning well, but upregulating other systems to help protect you. You should expect your gut to become dysfunctional and change. You should expect your sex hormones to become dysregulated. You should expect a level of depression. You should expect a level of puffiness and inflammation. You should expect these things to occur because this is your body has to do this. It's meant to do it short term, acute. Everybody has had short term, acute multi-system issues. When your husband gets sick, I'm tired, I'm fatigued, constipated, like that's not broken physiology. That is the adaptation. Now, we're not good at that happening for an extended period of time. That's when things start to break down, but we should have that expectation. So I don't, when listeners, if you're the person who's like, I did all this work and I felt better, and then I had all this life stress and it worked, came back, these same problems came back again. Don't look at that as failure or nothing ever worked before. It worked before. Problem is the stress now became excessive again. And you got to do exactly what Sophie was just saying is, hey, I got to reduce or eliminate these stressors. Some of them are easy. Some are not easy. You're not going to get rid of a sick mother. You can't turn that off. So we'll talk about this in a little bit with the NLP stuff, but this is where you have to potentially change your thought and perception of the experience so that it doesn't create the same stress load. So I know for a lot of practitioners, we have like our kind of process for how we think about helping somebody. You have a system called the Thriving Thyroid Method. You want to explain that a little bit, what that is and what that means?
Yeah, I'm happy to. I think, yeah, we all have our systems. I think it's helpful for me to put it into steps.
Mhm.
There's so much noise out there about all the things you could do. And so, what are like the key foundational steps to health? And that's a lot of where the training in FDN came from. Is his whole theory is the dress for health success. So it's diet, rest, exercise, stress reduction, and strategic supplementation. So for me, I have three steps. The first one is rewire your brain. The second one is to nourish your thyroid. And the third one is to detox your thyroid. And so with that first step, and we can go as deep, I'll do a couple sentences on each and we can kind of see where we want to go. But with that first step, it is really about changing your perception and locating the same way we do detective work about, parasites or mold and these things in the physical body. We can also do detective work in our emotional body. What are the thoughts and the patterns and the beliefs that are keeping us stuck and keeping us stressed out? And then rewiring those thoughts, those beliefs, and processing those emotions. So that's that one first step. The second step, being nourish your thyroid, is really about nourishing completely, like getting good rest, actually, like sleeping through the night, those things,
Mhm.
eating the right foods for your body, getting enough calories. Most people that I talk to are not eating enough, especially in the thyroid world, because they're overweight because of the, because that's what their body is, how it's reacting. And so they're under eating. And a piece of that I also do is mineral balancing, which is where we test your minerals and we actually get you on the right strategic supplementation for your body. What are you actually low in? What nutrients are you low in? And that has completely changed so many of my Hashimoto's and hypothyroid clients because they start having energy again, their hair starts growing, their nails start growing, all the things that like we look for kind of happy people. Their brain starts feeling better, there's less inflammation, their body just starts working. And then from that place of really being nourished, really feeling calm, their nervous system is relaxed, right? Because we've been able to kind of identify those thoughts and help them process. Then we will look at, is there anything to detox? Are there parasites? Is there bacteria? Is there mold? Are there any other like physical body stressors like that need to kind of come out of the body? Something that I learned, I've been doing this for a while, and something that I've learned that's been really interesting is a lot of people coming in are so depleted by the time they get to me that if I just put them on some harsh protocol, like gut protocol, a lot of times they're really reactive and they have to repeat the process. Well, since doing the mineral balancing and supporting their mind and their nervous system, they really don't have to do it multiple times. So that's why we go in that order in the 3 steps.
So let's take the first one because I think that's one that I think is critical to people getting healthy and or having the ability to heal and recover. And I don't think it gets enough attention. And sometimes it's either you believe there's a emotional fitness component, or people, it's either too woo woo, or somebody's either all in or they're like, that's not an issue for me, right? And I know from my own personal experience, when you're in a situation, when you're in pain, when you have a chronic health issue, it does wear on your mind and you start to focus on the illness, you focus on the negative thoughts, focus on how bad you are, and that continues to manifest the situation. And it's not until many times people start to change their perception of what's going on that they can start to heal and repair. I mean, if in your mind, if you're going, I'm sick, I'm sick, I'm sick, your body's going to manifest that. And then no wonder you can't heal your GI tract or any other system in your body because your brain is still getting those signals. So let's talk about this step 1 for you. How do you go about assessing that you need to do somebody's physiology to determine that you need to do this kind of rewiring step?
I think you nailed it. People have to be open. Not everyone is open all the way. I had a client, she was 60 years old and she had Hashimoto's for like 30 years. And she's like, I don't have any emotional things. I don't have that. I'm like, okay. So we're working through, and about halfway through, she goes, wow, Sophie, I'm really struggling with the grief of losing my mom. Can we talk about it? And then it was really interesting by the end of the program that working on that and supporting her emotions was actually the biggest benefit for her. So I do think you have to be open. I also want to clarify, I don't think like it's our fault. I don't think we like cause ourselves to be sick, but I think it's just identifying all those stressors, right? So it's like if we're having a continuous repetitive thought that's creating stress in our system, then that our brain doesn't really know the difference between that or a parasite, right? So it's like identifying those things, and if you're open to them, starting to shift it. Something that we do that's actually inside of our group program is we actually just start with a positive visualization. That's something that they can listen to. I've had people just do that and create in their mind what they want. So a lot of times you ask someone, what do you want? And they tell you all the things that are wrong. Well, I have acne and I have this bloating and I have that and I have this, and that's okay. And those are all valid and we want to validate that. But what do you actually want? Oh, well, actually, I want to have like clear skin and feel confident. And I want to be able to put on my favorite skinny jeans. So we actually walk them through a process where they can visualize that. And if they want, they can listen to that every single morning as an audio to start to walk towards or imagine what it would be like for them to have that in their life. Again, you have to be open for it, but just that one step has been crucial for so many people just in creating a day where they're not constantly looking at the stress, looking at the anxiety, looking at the depression. And then if they want to, on our group calls or one-to-one, we can kind of do some data mining the same way you and I would look at someone's, intake form and see, what's going on in their physical body. We do the same thing in their emotional body. And we can identify, oh, I believe that, I'm not worthy, or I believe this and that. And then we can start to actually walk them through a process with language where they can rewire those beliefs. They're usually based from childhood. I'll just tell you that. So it's usually stuff that happened when we were younger. The same way we were talking about how our body can have like a set point towards diarrhea or a set point towards like a sinus infection. Our brains can have a set point towards a certain belief or pattern. So once we identify that pattern, we can actually just rewire it through tools like parts work, inner child work, timeline work, and hypnosis, if people are open to it. And that helps them really get going in the right direction. And if people aren't open to it, it's okay. We can always come back to it. We can always move on to nourishing. Like my client, that I was telling you about, she didn't start there because she wasn't open at the time, but then she went back and felt like that was really supportive for her. So what I find is if people are open, it changes a lot more than just their thyroid. It changes their whole life. It changes how they are in relationship to people. It changes their boundaries. It changes their feeling about themselves and how confident they feel. And it changes their happiness score and their joy in their life. So it's a really crucial step for me.
Yeah, I think as a more hard science guy, like I really, after a period of time, I started to realize that what people were thinking about themselves and telling themselves either consciously or subconsciously on a daily basis really is going to determine their success level. And it's not unusual that when somebody calls me or schedules a discovery call for me, they get on the call and they talk about I have this stress, I got that stress, I got this stress, I got this stress, and and I just need to know, like, I want to know what thyroid medication I should be taking, or what should I be taking T3 or not T3, or what are what supplements. So I get a lot of those calls where people want the answer. I'm like, listen, you need to spend money. All I heard you tell me was all the things that are creating the excessive stress load, and I'll walk them through that two cinder blocks in the plank analogy that we use. And I'm like,
Love that. Mm-hmm.
if the board is broken, right? It doesn't matter if you take it doesn't matter what you do until you take all of the weight off that board. You're not rebuilding that board. You can't fix it. And so you're trying to figure out what you can take that's going to work well with this excessive real or perceived stress load. That's your issue. You have to, that's the elephant in the room. Well, I have kids. I'm like, well, I know you. Well, everybody has kids, but they create this and that. I'm like, is it really that they're creating that issue, or are you perceiving that to be the issue? And it's not to blame, but we get into these, we start telling ourselves, my husband's stressing me out. My husband's stressed. Guess what? He's probably stressing you out, right? He's probably and that's going to change your
That's right.
physiology. And as long as you keep thinking he's stressing me out, and and he makes me unhappy, and he does this, there's not enough supplementation or medication that's going to restore your physiology back to homeostasis, right? You're
Exactly.
still going to be in this kind of fight or flight response. And you should expect then all of these systems to not work as well, because now your body's in defense.
And right. And then apply that to insert any, functional medicine protocol that they try to do, right? They try to get the mold out of their body. They try this supplement. It didn't work. I thought vitamin D was supposed to fix it. And it's just like, because of exactly what you just described, right? The brain is interpreting that as stress. There's a whole chain of reactions in our hormones that are going on when we feel that we're constantly in fight or flight or freeze, right? The same thing happened to me when I was in that relationship. I was in functional freeze. I could not get out of that relationship in my mind. But once I actually had some tools, I was able to have like the strength to get out of there, right? I'll use my mom's cancer story as because I think sometimes people can hear this stuff and be like, oh my gosh, but wait, but I have extenuating circumstances, and that can be true. And like, it's really interesting for me. I have a little bit of distance. My mom's okay, just to like close that loop. She's okay. She's recovering. She's not on chemo anymore. She's in remission. But my mom's mindset about this cancer, she goes, I'm not going to be a victim. I'm not a cancer survivor. I'm going to kick this cancer's butt. And I'm not like falling into this like cancer, woe is me thing. I'm just not going to do it, right? That was her mindset. Honestly, my mindset is my mom's going to die. I was totally dysregulated for multiple months. And guess what? It changed my physiology, like you said. I felt I needed more thyroid medication, right? I mean, I know that that's not really the root, but it was like, oh my gosh, like my hair's falling out again. And I'm gaining, like, I gained a little bit of, not so much weight, but that puffy, feeling that we see in our face and all that stuff. All the things started to shift again. And actually, that was the thing that made me go, wait a second, this, wait, you got to find a way to look at this cancer in a different way. How can you start to regulate yourself a little bit? And it took time. It's not like it took a minute. And I was like, oh, great. Yeah, I know that this is, it took time. And I really needed to like, be scared and be in my emotions. And also, then I was like, okay, this is not serving me. And it's also not serving my mom. And I can't be there for her because I'm so dysregulated. So that's just like an example where, she just never let it do that. She just didn't. I mean, she just,
She
like,
reframed her situation. And I use that analogy, I use that kind of discussion with people like, you're entitled to your pity party, right? Your mom gets diagnosed, you're entitled to your pity party. Your mom gets diagnosed, she's entitled to her pity party. The issue is, if you continue to stay in that pity party mindset, it's going to be very difficult to heal and recover from that mindset, because you're going to be focused on more likely to focus on the negative, not the solution. You're focused on problem, not solution. And when you're focused on problem and you're focused on worry, it's essentially fear physiology. And that is going to upregulate your sympathetic nervous system, downregulate your parasympathetics. And it makes it really hard to get better. And this is where sometimes people, I've seen 6 functional medicine practitioners and done 18 gut protocols, and none of them worked. Well, they all probably helped manage, but your state didn't change. And because your state didn't change, the terrain didn't change. And because the terrain didn't change, as soon as any Band-Aid got taken away because you were better, the problem comes right back, right?
exactly.
And so that becomes the key. And I think what's important is that the quicker I think we can get ourselves out of that pity party mode, it's not that it doesn't suck. Like, hey, this happened to your mom. It sucks. Nobody wants to see that happen. But how can I reframe this situation so it's a positive experience versus a negative? And somebody like, well, cancer is never a positive. Well, okay, wait a second. Let's think about it. Maybe this is an experience for my mom to change her diet, to change her lifestyle, to change her nutrition. This is going to potentially make my mom healthier for the long run. I'll get to spend more time. I get to spend now the time that, instead of answering her phone call or saying I'll go over another time, now I realize how important she is potentially in my life. And I need to not take those moments for granted and spend more time. So how can I reframe the situation to make it better? Right.
And yeah, and I think, perhaps I would feel differently if she hadn't beat this cancer right now. I mean, maybe I'd still be in a place where I'd be very emotional and have a lot of grief, but fortunately that was not the case for her. But those are exactly some of the learnings actually that I pulled from this. And actually, I want to share that her doctors were amazed that she kicked it so fast. She had a 6-month plan for chemo, and at month 3, the cancer was gone. And she didn't have any bad reactions to the chemo and any of this stuff. And so when she was talking to the doctors about why that might be, they said because your body was already strong. Because she had actually listened to me and gotten off sugar and gluten and some other things that I knew were inflaming her well before. And so when she got this, she actually had a stronger constitution, I think. And that was like one of the reasons why she kicked it so fast, and why that's what the doctor said anyway. So for me, there was a lot of learnings after of like, oh, you know what? It is actually really important what we talk about, what you and I talk about, Eric. It's like, let's work on our body. Let's nourish ourselves. Let's eat really healthy foods. Let's try to reduce inflammation. Let's work on our mindset, all these things, because they matter. And also, our relationships are the most important thing. That was one of the biggest takeaways. I've been so busy building this business, and it's not that I don't lean into my relationships, but you best believe I went down to my mom's house and we snuggled for 2 weeks straight, during this and got some really good quality time. And it was a big wake up call for me of how am I spending my time? So I do think that there can be silver linings. I want to respect that obviously there are situations where, we do have really, really horrible things that happen. Yeah, I think for me in this situation, it was like, okay, after several months of not feeling well, I was just going to choose something different.
So let's give the listeners maybe some tools. I know you can't fix everything, but if somebody's really struggling, they've had chronic illness, they've had chronic thyroid issues, they've done, it's the average person that comes. I've been to multiple functional practitioners. Like, what are the key things that you would explain to somebody that may help them understand that this is probably a key thing you need to address? Is there, you looking at their health history, you looking at their health timeline? Hey, I've seen multiple practitioners, I've tried all these supplements, I'm sensitive to everything, nothing works. Like, what are the key things that clue you in that, hey, this is the thing, this is the elephant in the room that we really need to focus on? And then what I really would like is, what are some key tips that anybody can use from your perspective to start to change their programming, and tips and tools that they could use?
Great question. So I think you're spot on. When I go through their health history, I do ask quite a lot of questions about sympathetic dominance, that fight or flight place. And a lot of times people just click them all. So that's a pretty big indicator, but I can usually tell before someone fills out the form, just through what they share, kind of what you were saying earlier, like, oh my gosh, I have all these stressors and da 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 da. Da. And a lot of times people are like talking a mile a minute, or they're completely exhausted. Those are two huge, huge, huge. Like if you're talking to someone and they just are deadpan and they have no energy, that would be more like a functional freeze place, right? Where they've just kind of been so depleted for that long time and can't really get up and go. So those are some clues that I look for on the health history. I listen for language. So NLP stands for neuro linguistics programming. So the linguistics is just like listening to language and how does someone describe something? And a lot of times it'll be what we've been talking about, where there's so much going on in their life where they can't find the time, for example, to commit to their health, right? And so things like that I'll look for. On the mineral test, there's actually a nervous system marker and an adrenal marker that can kind of start to give us some clues in terms of what's going on with their nervous system. So if it's inverted, we know that the person is really, really dysregulated. So those are some things and we do that mineral test really early on too, so we can kind of get a confirmation. So those are some of the things I look for. I think also just the physiology, like we were talking about, normally when someone's really dysregulated, they'll have like intermittent constipation or diarrhea. It's kind of both. They'll have kind of chronic insomnia issues, or they wake up or they can't get to sleep. And then they also are usually dealing with some other issues, usually joint pain or fatigue. So I look for all of those things for that
So
part.
what are some key strategies that somebody might say, listen, I know I've got a lot of stress going on. I know I've got all of these things going on, but what am I supposed to do? I have a kid that's special needs. I have a husband who's made lose his job. We have financial issues. Like, those things aren't going away. So there is this constant load on their psyche, right? That's going to drop their
Absolutely.
emotional fitness. So what are a couple techniques, walk away techniques that you can help somebody either change how they think about things, reframe things, or bring themselves back to a more positive thinking state?
Absolutely. I think I would almost, in those types of situations, sometimes, we can't think our way through it immediately. Like the situation with my mom, or a financial situation can be really, really challenging, or special needs children, all those things. It might not be just about thinking about it positively, but actually supporting the physiology. So when you have a thought that's stressful, or when something is stressful like that, we know that there's a chain reaction in the body, right? So one thing that we can do, and I know this is talked about a lot, but it's just something I could share easily in the podcast, is supporting your vagus nerve. And the vagus nerve traveling throughout most of your body is going to be communicating those signals with your nervous system that there is danger. So you may not be able to control the situation, but maybe you're at a point where you're listening to this and you're like, man, I really feel like I want to support my body so that I'm not having this like chronic inflammatory state. There's a couple techniques. I don't know if people are going to hear this or listen to it, but I'll describe both and maybe be able to like show you. So some that are really, really helpful, and I have headphones on, so I can't completely show this, but one of the ones that's one of my most favorite is that the vagus nerve kind of comes down around your neck. So if you manipulate from your ears, and I have my headphones in so I can't, but if you pull on your earlobes or you split your two fingers, your pointer finger and your middle finger on either side of your ear, and you pull down the side of your neck to your collarbone, that can send a signal of safety to your system. So it can be something very quick, because those situations you're describing, like I can already see it. It's like you're in the car, the kid's screaming, there's all this different stuff. So what is something that we could do in the moment, right? That's something you could do. You can do butterfly taps where you cross your thumbs and put them at your chest and you actually tap on your chest slowly. That actually also tells the system, I am safe. You can also combine these with some mantras if it feels like it's, in your belief system to do so. So something like, I'm always safe in my body, or I'm getting to safety, or I am okay, or those types of things to just kind of start to shift your mind a little bit in the instant of, because if not, to your point of like the mindset reset, so you might not be able to change the macro picture, but you could at least maybe shift in your mind right now that like you are actually physically safe. Like there is no harm actually coming to your body. It's a little bit of trickery because you're like kind of like trying to tell the body, hey, like it's okay, kind of calm down. So those are some things that you can do. If anyone's ever taken a yoga class, you can do legs up the wall. This is kind of funny. So you put your legs up the wall and it recirculates your blood in the other direction, right? It kind of like slows things down. I have one of my best friends, she has this joke going where she says, I can be anxious, but I have to be anxious with my legs up the wall. Which is a joke because she literally can't be in that anxiety feeling with her legs up the wall. It doesn't work for her because she's just so calm. And then the last one I would say, and anyone could do this anywhere, is just different breathing techniques. One that comes to mind, I know this is talked about a lot, but it does work, is breathing out longer than you breathe in. So when you do that, it sends a relaxation signal to your body. So if you breathed in for like 4 seconds and you breathed out for 7 seconds, that can really start to kind of regulate your system. So those are more nervous system tools, and I think that those are really important. And you can stack them with the mindset of, I'm every day I'm getting healthier, or every day I'm healing, or every day I'm walking towards healing, or I am safe right now, or I am okay. Those types of things that you can say if you would like to, if they would help you feel safe. So those are some of the things like in an instance like that. I think the deeper mindset work comes not from maybe situations that are like these uncontrollable things, right? That you might have mentioned, but more beliefs that are like, I'm not worthy, or I don't believe in myself, or, nothing ever works for me. Those are beliefs where we can go in and do some of these other tools like parts work and, inner child work and things like that to kind of support the system at a more brain-based level.
Yeah. And so with those techniques that you were talking about, the tapping, the breathing, the goal there is to increase stimulation to the vagal system.
Yeah, and also because you can do things that could, like, you can put your face in ice water, right? That's another way you can stimulate. I think it depends on the situation. Like, are you more in this depressed state and that would like kind of like wake you up? Or are you in a place where you're kind of hyperventilating and need to kind of calm down the system?
Mhm.
But either way, you're regulating your system. It's the way I
Yeah.
would describe it.
So you're trying to do things to kind of change the state a little bit. I know, depending if you're, Tony Robbins and all these other people that have taught a lot of these techniques. But for me, I think one of the things that's important is if you know that these things go on and you know that you can quickly escalate that negative thinking in your mind, I think it's always good to have that some type of an anchor to kind of bring you back. And whether it's a visual thing or something else, for years I used to just wear a rubber band on my wrist, and when that stinking thinking would start to build up, I'd see the rubber band. Early on, I would snap the rubber band because then that hurt, and that would be like, okay, you got to stop thinking this way.
You
After a
can,
while, that hurts, and then you go, okay, I'm not going to snap it anymore.
yeah, don't
And
hurt
you
yourself.
and you don't have to do that, but you look at that rubber band and you go, all right, what's my thought process
Yeah.
going on in my mind? And that's enough. That can be enough to change it. At
There,
one point, go ahead.
yeah, I was going to say what you just said is like it's called interrupting the pattern. So
Hmm.
there's a process I walk people through called IMEDS that is like the first step is interrupting the pattern. So you could tap yourself on the top of the head, or you snap the thing, or do 20 jumping jacks. If you feel like you're like in a pattern that you know you've been in before with the stinking thinking. I love that little
Hmm.
phrase, by the way. And then you can calm yourself down with one of those tools that I just shared. Like you can, because if you want to actually investigate, what's going on, a lot of times we can't investigate those patterns if we're stressed, right? If we're stressed about the
Hmm.
pattern, we're in the spiral, we got to break the pattern. So you can break the pattern like with what you just said, and then you can calm yourself down with one of those vagus toning tools. And then there is like a journaling exercise I walk people through where you can actually like identify for what purpose am I having this thought? Is it trying to keep me safe? Am I really looking for connection? Like, why am I doing this? And kind of asking yourself those questions. It's a whole process. It'll probably take a lot longer to explain, but in doing so, you can kind of identify the root behind the pattern of thinking and then start to choose something else. So the last step on that is solidify the new identity where you're like, okay, well, what do I want next time? Or what do I want instead? Do I need to have a different type of conversation with myself, with someone else? Do I need to make sure I ate better? What is the thing that I could do to kind of shift this for the next time? And so that can be really powerful. So I love the I have a elastic on my wrist idea because it does just snap you out and then you can start to investigate a little bit more as to why that's coming up for you all the time.
Yeah, and it doesn't have to be a rubber band. At one point I was giving out like, I don't know, thousands of foam noses at the local junior high school and kind of talking to them about stress and kind of told them a story about a clown nose and you know and that would help the kid. It was silliness at the moment of the talk, but I had multiple people, parents more, come in and tell me how that changed their experience with their kid. They got angry with the kid put the nose on, and it was like, what am I doing? Like, I'm going to hit my kid, and it changed everybody's state, right? From something that could be violent, something that could be uh, a little thing that got blown into something big because maybe dad or mom had a bad day at work, right? And now this stupid little, 10-cent foam nose changes everybody's
Wow.
life in the moment, right?
That's
So,
an amazing story. I love to hear that. That's really cool. It reminds me of a tool you can use when you're like you're frustrated by something and you can sing the frustration out loud, like,
mhm,
Jeffrey, why did you not do the dishes even though they've been
mhm,
in there? Just
yeah.
something to change the pattern because otherwise we kind of get in these grooves.
Yeah. So um, there's people probably listening to this and they know they've go back into default patterns, right? They know when they're okay, I changed my diet, I'm eating better, I'm eating healthy, I start exercising, and they're on the right track, and then they find they revert and they go back to their old habits, right? So the big issue, and I've had people say to me, why do I continue to do the same things? Why do I keep doing it? What is it? Or why do they choose not to do the things? I'm sure you've had clients that you tell, here's what I need you to do, and they don't do it. I need you to start doing this. And you talk to them, they're like, I couldn't do it. Um, I always, my general consent or thought process is, and what I explain to them is like, you're really uncomfortable in your uncomfortableness. You're very comfortable in your uncomfortableness, and you're uncomfortable with what might have happened possibly, right? You projecting these false emotions that may occur. What if this environment, as uncomfortable as this is, this is what I know and this is what I feel comfortable in. I don't know what that is. Fear of the unknown. Maybe my friends will have to change. Maybe I have to change a relationship. Maybe people won't like me because I'm not eating and drinking or partying or doing these things. What kind of advice do you see those things happening? And then what kind of, with your experience and your background, especially maybe with NLP, what kind of help can we provide somebody who's really struggling with why they don't do the things they know they should do consistently?
It's such a great example, and I do see it all the time. Part of it is it's actually more difficult for the brain to do something different. So the brain likes efficiency. So if it's always chosen to eat the cheeseburger, it will continue to do that because it's actually easier. There's actually kind of it takes work, right, to actually think a new way or do something different. It's kind of like the example I give is if you go to the grocery store and you've always eaten regular bread, but then someone tells you you got to eat gluten-free bread, and now it takes you 10 times longer to figure out what bread to buy, right? It's the same thing when we're changing anything in our health and lifestyle in our mind. So that is one thing, and I think there are stories associated with that we have created, right? They are stories like what you just said. What if my, partner doesn't understand? What if all my friends have to change? It's the same thing. I would imagine you may have gone through some similar stuff. I know I did when I started my business, right? It's
Hmm.
like, wait, well, now I'm not working on Broadway as a stage manager. Now I'm like helping people with their health. And guess what? My friends did change, you
Hmm.
know? So there are real fears that we project onto ourselves that limit us. This for me comes down to being willing to lean in to yourself and learn what it is for you. And this is a big part of what we do inside of She Thrives, inside the program, because I want to give an example to share the story. I had a client who had come to me multiple years before I had any of the mindset and emotional training. She was overweight, like pretty overweight, over 200 pounds. And she was like, I have to lose weight. I have these kids. I want to be alive and healthy and run around with them, and I can't. And weight was a really big thing for her. So we started with the nutrition. I gave her what to do, but she couldn't commit to it. And she was so frustrated and hard on herself. And I finally just said, there is a deeper reason why you can't commit to yourself, and we got to get there. When we did, it turned out that what had happened when she was young was that her grandmother and her mom had kind of put her into a box of unworthiness because of her weight. And she had this feeling that it doesn't matter what I do, I'll always be overweight. I'll never look this way. And I'm this is who I am. This is the person that I am. And so every time she tried to step away from who she thought she was, she snapped back like that rubber band back to the old identity. And she's like, well, what's the point? It'll never change. That was her belief system. We worked on supporting her inner child. We gave her inner child resources. We rewired the way she was thinking about it. She had a new perspective coming out of those sessions. And it was amazing, Eric. She started to just make the changes that I had been telling her to do for years, but she just couldn't commit to it because it felt so unsafe in her system, especially because her parent was still alive. And she actually had to have a conversation with that parent about how that had changed her life and what she was going to do going forward. So she actually created new boundaries with her parents about how they could treat her, how they could talk to her, and what she was and was not willing to accept into her life anymore. And that she was going to be the identity of someone who is healthy. So she starts making these changes. She's going to hot yoga. She's eating right. She's lost over 100 pounds now. She looks like a
Hmm.
totally different person. And it's just such a great example of like, when we think about root causes, when I think about root causes, I'm also thinking about like, what are those things that are keeping us stuck? So if there's something where you are like continuously rubber banding back to that old identity, then there's just something in your system that doesn't probably feel safe or seen or heard that just needs to be supported. And it's not about shaming or blaming ourselves because that's really not going to get us anywhere. It's recognizing that we have patterns of belief usually in place from when we were young because it got us safety. It got us attention, it got us love. And so unless we can rewire ourselves to realize that we can have those things without that belief and we can have a new belief, we will keep defaulting back to that. And I think that that's a really big important thing I want to make sure that people hear is this is not about like shaming and blaming your belief systems about this stuff. It's about recognizing what's not serving me anymore. And can I, lean into this as a root issue as well and start to kind of rewire the brain.
Yeah. And even um I think it's important too that we consider that not only should you not blame yourself, right? And say, oh, this is what I did this to myself. But even from the things we were talking about, like the mothers, the fathers, the teachers, the preachers that created these patterns, if you continue to blame them for who you are today, you're still stuck in the pattern, right? Like,
Totally.
because you're still giving them ownership and living up to their perception of who you are. So it doesn't mean you have to have the best. It doesn't mean you have to forgive them for like, okay, now we're going to be best friends again because even though you did all this stuff, because that too can create some anger. But I think from my perspective, like if you have a parent who really did nasty things to you and really create some challenges for you, I think you can forgive them, whether you do that in person or you forgive them in your own mind, which is, I think, the more important place, and say, hey, um, I'm going to forgive them. They did what they could do. Maybe they thought what they were doing is best, but it's my responsibility to move forward all these negative things. How can I use those negative things that happen to project my life forward? Even the positive things in somebody's life, like, hey, I had a terrible upbringing. That didn't happen, but now I've got a successful business and great family and all those. Part of that success that you have is because of all those hardships that you went through, but you changed the perspective and said, hey, that happened to me. It stinks, but I'm going to use that as a tool to grow, to develop, and say, hey, I'm not going to let that find me. And I'm going to use that as a driver to be more successful, to be a better parent, to be a better spouse, to be a better whatever. I'm not sure if that fully aligns with your thinking, but it's probably good to get some commentary on that from you.
Yeah, I think it does to an extent. And like exactly in that story, this wasn't about her then just blaming her parents for everything. It was really about her recognizing, I can only control my side of the street. I can't control their side of the street. They did what they
Hmm.
did with the best that they could with the resources that they had. Because of course, they learned that from their parents, right? And there's ancestral, trauma that gets passed down.
Hmm.
And so it was for her, it was really about how can I be more empowered here? And for her, one of those action steps was about like deciding to shift the way that she was going to be in a relationship with those
Hmm.
people.
Hmm.
I think, we do want to be mindful about people who've had really serious big T trauma, where there's been, real abuse and things like this that have gone on. I think that can maybe be a different conversation and need different support.
Hmm.
But for these types of things where maybe it wasn't like big T trauma, but it was just the way that we perceived what happened or something happened in a way that really created an identity for us. How can we start to take our power back? Yeah.
Yeah. And sometimes those people don't even know that what they did or what they've done or what they've said had the impact
Yeah.
it did,
I
right?
mean, this is kind of a silly example, but I feel like it's probably worth bringing up. I just thought of this. I have a client who didn't feel like she had a lot of safety with people and didn't feel like boundaries were like ever really, I guess, honored. And so she had this kind of defensive posture, or especially around men, of like, I have to keep myself safe. And so like it was like this almost like a hyper vigilance around keeping herself safe, right? And for a good reason in her mind, right? And like that could be a good thing in the right scenario, obviously. But it was so interesting when we dug into it. It was coming from this like kind of seemingly silly thing that happened when she was in, I think, pre-K, where her mom was a teacher's assistant or was helping out at school, and this little boy like pinched her mom's butt and nothing happened to the kid. And she was like, there's, I got to protect,
Hmm.
these boundaries. And so it can sometimes be these things that, you know, it are almost like she said, when she told me this is silly. I can't believe this is, but it's just where the belief was created from,
Yeah.
and so it's just, yeah, it's just reshaping how we think about that original event can actually kind of change the whole chain reaction in our timeline all the way up to now.
Yeah. So I do want to talk about, you talked about mineralization, remineralizing. What is this? Tell me, let's talk to explain to listeners, what does that really, what's that mean?
Yeah, the way I view it is minerals are kind of the spark plugs of our life, and they create energy in our cells. And so
Hmm.
when we're talking about, unloading stressors, one of the ways I think that we can do that is by nourishing, by adding in. And so there's obviously certain foods we know that are just helpful overall, but one of the tests that we'd like to run, it's really affordable too, which is wonderful, is a hair tissue mineral analysis. And I've been training with Lisa Patel at Vicon for like over a year, and she's like the, top person who knows all about the minerals. And it's been fascinating to apply it to clients where we can actually see patterns of nervous system dysregulation. We can see there's a thyroid ratio that talks about how if there's too much calcium and not enough potassium, the thyroid hormone isn't going to really be uptaken into the cells. So what I see a lot with my thyroid people is that ratio. I see a lot of low sodium, a lot of low potassium, a lot of low magnesium. And these nutrients are so crucial for like thousands and thousands of enzymatic experiences in our body. Sodium, for example, people put it as a bad mineral, but it actually gives us so much energy. It's really important for our adrenals. So when we remineralize, we're really thinking about like, how can we give you like a bucket of support so that your cells can do what they want and need to be doing based off your patterns? What are the nutrients you're actually low in? And I think I'll just say that, yeah, I see a lot of people who have very dysregulated minerals, and they're taking like multivitamins or prenatals because we think, okay, I'm getting everything I need. But what we know about minerals is that they are synergists and they're antagonists. So having the right amounts and the right ratios actually turns on the right functions in our body. And so that's where when we do the test, we actually create them a customized plan of exactly what they need for their body at that time. And I've just seen it, like I say, I've had people have period issues, pain go away, right, get their cycle back. I've had thyroid people have way more energy and their brain fog goes away. Just so many changes in the positive when people mineral balance. And it's actually funny, like people run out of their minerals and they're like, Sophie, I need my minerals. Like I don't feel well without them. So that's kind of the process and why it could be helpful for people.
So I've had a couple people talk about hair tissue mineral analysis on the podcast, but it's hard to get a good answer from some people regarding what are we really evaluating? Are we assessing the hair like it's any one of their other tissues and it's just an easy area to assess? Or are we looking at the hair as a pathway to eliminate things from the system?
Mm.
What are we looking at? Okay, because I think that's where a lot of people who aren't quite sure about hair tissue mineral analysis trying to get that kind of clear answer as to what are we really assessing? Like if we're assessing the blood, we know we're looking at what's in the blood, and that is it's not necessarily a reflection of what's in the tissue. I've heard some people say the hair tissue analysis it's a we're looking at the hair because it's a way the body's kind of detoxing things out of the system. I've had other people say it's matching what's going on in the tissues. So what is it? Like, what are we really assessing when we're looking at the hair tissue mineral analysis?
I think one of the things that I like about it, and no test is perfect, but one thing I like about it is it's giving you, if you do it properly, it's giving you an average of the tissue levels of those minerals. And some minerals are meant to be better read in tissue and some better in blood. Like iron, I wouldn't look at iron on an HTMA. You got to get a full blood panel. That's a better measurement. So it is looking at the tissue level, and it is a measurement of the last like 3-ish months. Whereas blood is like a snapshot for the day, right? So we know that blood's always moving. So that can be sometimes really helpful is to get both to see where someone's at. And I think the detoxing part, I'm wondering if those people might be talking about the toxic elements part of it. So there's a toxic element that looks at like cadmium and mercury and all those other things. I think with those, what we see usually is that similar to like if you ran a mycotoxin test and you're, urinating out the toxins, there with metals, they can start to, as the body gets stronger, typically the metals go up, and it's not necessarily about a recent exposure, but more about how much strength the body has to be eliminating the heavy metals. So a little bit different, and maybe that's why there's been confusion. Is that when we're looking at the minerals, that's really like a 3-month average, and the metals is also, but it's also about like detoxing the metals out or pushing the metals out. How much is coming out through the cells versus it being like, oh my gosh, I have this amount of aluminum stuck in my body.
So if somebody had a lot of, let's say, aluminum in their hair, we might look at that as the body's releasing aluminum from stored tissue, from fat or wherever the storage would be. Is
Yeah.
that
Yeah, that's kind of how that would work on that particular similar to like a mycotoxin test that it's releasing that.
right? Sometimes
Yeah.
people see like elevated mycotoxins and they go, okay, um, I'm loaded with mycotoxins. Well, maybe you're releasing them, right? If you're exposed to it, you should have potentially mycotoxins in your urine because you're exposed to it. That's what would be a healthy response. The person that we might be more concerned with would be the person who knows they're living in a mold-rich environment and has no mycotoxins in their urine, because that means, hey, I'm getting exposed to this stuff, but I'm not clearing it out of the system appropriately, and that may be contributing to inflammation, obesity, and some of the other issues they have.
Yeah.
But how do we then justify? So if somebody saw elevated, let's say, magnesium in their hair, would that correlate with magnesium clearance, or is that correlate with magnesium storage and sufficiency?
Each mineral is a little different in how it's interpreted on an HTMA. With magnesium specifically, the theory there is that if it's elevated, it's typically not that someone has too much of it, but that they're burning through it. So kind of going into the magnesium burn rate and how high is that person's stress that it's coming out. And so that's one like example where it's considered like a loss pattern when it's really, really high. And, if you look at like someone who has a really elevated magnesium, they'll typically also present with like insomnia and muscle cramps and some of those things we know to kind of be associated with a deficiency. And when we balance the minerals and it kind of comes back into the range that we want it to be in, those things go away. So that one gets misinterpreted a lot.
So somebody might get their test back and they may have an elevation and it could be an indication of loss. Is there a mineral that we might see high levels in the hair and say, oh, that's a sign of
Yes.
sufficiency or
Yeah, I
too
think
much in the tissue and not loss?
yeah, I think one that's really interesting is the calcium. So if that one starts to shoot up high, in the mineral analysis world, what that means is that it's not in the right place. So we want a lot of our calcium to be in our bones and teeth, and not in our tissues, right? It's like it's coming out through the hair, and we're seeing that is usually because it doesn't have the cofactors it needs. So a lot of people will take like calcium supplements, right, for their bone health, but they don't know that they might also need vitamin K2 to like get it into the right spot, or vitamin A and magnesium and all these other things that help to kind of balance it and control it. So that's one where we do want to actually support like kind of lowering it on the test, but like actually getting it into the right spot, right? Like I think most people would agree, we don't just take calcium without some of those other synergists and cofactors.
So do you see on those tests that the people often with high calcium in their hair are some of the same people that are taking vitamin D supplementation?
Yes. Every time. Not every time, because sometimes it can be other things, but often, yeah, it can be. This vitamin D is a whole other conversation, but I've seen it where vitamin D is actually kind of potentially displacing that calcium. Vitamin D is, a complicated thing because I think we see it low in storage values, and so then we just supplement with it. But you again might need other other minerals and other synergists and to go along with it. But I see that a lot, actually.
Yeah. I would expect that you probably would. And for the listener, why this is important, because so many people are taking, in my opinion, taking excessive levels of supplemental vitamin D when
It's
that's really
crazy.
not the way we should be. We were designed to get vitamin D.
Right.
But when you take vitamin D, 25, you're taking vitamin D, it has to be converted to 25 OHD by the liver, which is going to use up some magnesium to transport it. It's going to use up magnesium in the conversion process. And then that 25 vitamin D needs to do we need to do something with it. It's a circulating storage form. And one of the things that we see is that it's chronically low in a lot of people. And so we think that they need more. But there's some of the vitamin D science says, hey, a lot of that vitamin D is going to go into fat storage. And we thought it just got stored there, right? It was just benign in there. And now we realize in more animal studies, because you can't do some of these studies in humans, is that the vitamin D doesn't just go sit in the fat cell. It actually gets activated, converted to the activated form in the fat cells, and can actually increase the size or the number of white adipose tissue. Now, that piece I think is still controversial, but not a great thing. Now, is that a good thing? Well, if you have inflammatory processes going on, one of the things that's going to happen is this storage form, 25 OHD, is going to get converted to the 125 vitamin D. And there's a reciprocal feedback loop that says, okay, we're going to downregulate this because vitamin D is a steroid, right? And it has some beneficial effects in the short term. But if we have chronic elevation of 125, especially in those fat cells, and they are enlarging as a result of that, whether it's quantity or size or quantity, the problem is now we create more room for food storage, and that we could actually, it could be a precursor to why people might be gaining weight. They did some rat studies where they actually knocked out the vitamin D receptor, and those rats could not get fat, which is interesting.
Wow. I did not know that. I would love
Yeah.
email me that link. That's incredible. That does correlate with what I would see. Typically, when people are taking vitamin D, then they have high calcium. They're what's called a slow oxidizer, which is kind of like a more sluggish metabolism. Very, very much like the same description of hypothyroid symptoms. And one of the biggest things is trouble losing weight. So that's
Yeah.
fascinating. It sounds like
So
you have still things to learn about vitamin
yeah,
D.
I think vitamin D is very valuable from an steroid perspective, but I think just like we wouldn't want somebody to be taking, uh, a corticosteroid for months and months and years on end, maybe we don't want to be doing that with vitamin D years and years. The other piece of that is what happens with vitamin D once it's converted to 125 vitamin D. It increases calcium intake and
Exactly.
demineralizes the bone. And so
Yes.
now we're putting more calcium into the bloodstream, right? And then the body has to do something with it. And one of the things 125 vitamin D will do is it'll increase calcium absorption into cells. And so if we increase the calcium absorption into the cells and we exceed the capacity, I think is of the sarcoplasm reticulum to store that excessive calcium, now we trigger more oxidative stress and more cell damage.
You
And
named
so
it.
so to me, and that may be where you start to see the correlation between, hey, if that's what's happening from the calcium perspective, is that elevated 125 vitamin D demineralizing or bringing more calcium in? And it's also pushing it into, because, hey, we got to do something with it. If we don't, is it laying down in our joint tissue? Is it laying down in our vascular system? We got to get it into the cells and tissues. And we do have a unique ability to hold on to a bunch of calcium inside the cell. But at some point, it does become the thing that's driving oxidative stress and cell damage,
I've
right?
seen it so many times, at least from a hair mineral test analysis, where it's creating so much stress on the system. And it's interesting, the thyroid ratio, so to speak, on that test is the calcium to potassium ratio. And the idea is that, like, yeah, because of this oxidative stress that the calcium could be creating, that the cells are like like not calcified, but that it's harder for them to get the nutrients in that they want because there's so much stress on that system and so much oxidative stress, and that potassium actually allows for more of that that pump system for more nutrients to get into the cell, including nutrients that we need to function with the thyroid. And it's been really cool to see people start to reverse that and what change happens for them. Just way less pain. I think that's one of the biggest things, a lot less pain and sometimes weight loss when we get the calcium regulated.
So in those situations, like you're with that ratio, you're saying that the hair calcium is going to be high, the hair potassium is going to be low.
Yeah.
Have you seen the correlation there with higher potassium than in the bloodstream as well? Because we do consider that higher blood potassium is often associated with more oxidative damage. So do you not really run a lot of blood work to correlate those things?
I love to run it if people, would want to see, especially with potassium, just to see where it's at. I actually see more, I've definitely seen it be elevated potassium in the blood, but more often than not, it's low or like the low end of the range, even from a functional perspective.
Interesting.
Yeah.
All right.
It is fascinating.
So
Nerds.
I think we got through a bunch. We're up to an hour and a half, so we'll finish this up. So
Sounds good.
Sophie, give the listeners a little bit more information about you, your website, your podcast, so they know where they can hear more about you and what you do.
Yeah, so everything's quite easy. It's all She Talks Health. So if you want to find me on Instagram, it's at She Talks Health. If you want to find the podcast, it's on every podcast platform, Spotify, Apple's, under She Talks Health. We are on a pause right now in November, but we'll be back in January. And we're also starting a Thyroid Thursday. I didn't know you did that. We're going to be doing that and answering questions and also having amazing guests like Eric on the podcast. And then, yeah, if you want to reach out and talk to me, my website, you can go to shetalkshealth.com/call and you can book a call with me there.
Awesome. All right, everybody, this is another Thyroid Answers podcast. Hope you enjoyed it. If you are enjoying it, subscribe to the podcast so you get downloaded automatically. Make sure you go out and give us a review. I think on most platforms, 5 is the best one, right? Isn't that the
I
best
think
one?
so.
5?
I think
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
Apple 5, and that's the
Yeah.
only place.
This one would definitely be a 5. But yeah, it was a great conversation, Sophie. I look forward to maybe more conversations like this in the future with you. So thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.